We thank Jared very much for, Brother Jared, for presenting chematology. And now what we'll work on is something that's actually related to the pledge that we took in terms of criticism. And we'll start off with a quote from Nana Jegi Shemsw Jehusi, also known as Dr. Jacob Carruthers, where he said, African champions must break the chain that links African ideas to European ones and listen to the voice of the ancestors without European interpreters. And we're going to perhaps work on that quote a little bit. So this is a review of What Net Shemsw, which is a brand new book by Ayi Kwei Armah. Now the book is about gaining inspiration from ancient Kemetic, i.e. ancient Egyptian myths, to chart a new course for Africa and African people on the basis of what is referred to as egalitarianism. And to start off with, I'd like to let us understand a little bit about what we'll be talking about. We'll talk about Asar, who the Greeks call Osiris. This is who we're talking about if we use either of those terms, quoting from different sources. Aset, who is the sister and wife of Asar, that's also called Isis by the Greeks. Heru, again Horus by the Greeks. Setesh, or Seth. Nebuchadnezzar, or Nephthys. Jehuti, what they refer to as Thoth, right? So I just don't want people to be confused. So now why is this critique important? One is because there's a bit of a contradiction in using Asar, a divine ruler, to argue against divine rulership, which is done in the book. Asar was at the center of a mythic hierarchy, therefore Asar couldn't have been anti-hierarchy nor the paragon of egalitarianism, and we'll present evidence to that effect. Also, sources have been left out that contradict the author's interpretation. So due to intentional or unintentional omission of such sources, the reader does not get a balanced view of so-called pre-dynastic or mythic times, or Asar as a representative thereof, but rather gets an idyllic interpretation of the author that contradicts primary, secondary, and tertiary sources on the myths to which the author refers. It's also important for this critique to be done because out of a 302-page, about over 3,000 years of history, a totality of 6 words are quoted from any Kemetic source, with the rest being the author's interpretation that is at odds with textual, iconographical, and archaeological evidence from Kemet itself. Asar, and then finally, a relatively minor point, Asar is presented as peaceful in the book, but again, primary, secondary, and tertiary sources so otherwise. So, Ayi Kwei Armah, he starts with a dichotomy of pre-dynastic egalitarianism versus dynastic monarchy. And in this, page 68, he says, the human incarnation of Sethian power at the start of dynastic rule in ancient Egypt was Narmer. The monarchical system initiated by Narmer lasted with notable interruptions from around 3300 BC till the Persian, Macedonian, and Roman invasions of North Africa, a total of some 3,000 years. And we'll go into how across those 3,000 years, 6 words are quoted and why that's problematic. Again, page 66, the patient, cumulative, cooperative, egalitarian work of Aset, Nebuchadnezzar, Jehuti, and Asar. And in describing these so-called pre-dynastic times, he says, in activities of the community, persuasion, not compulsion through violence of military force was the norm. It was this process of peaceful, incremental social and economic development based on egalitarian norms that the onset of the monarchical age stopped, and that is Narmer, so to speak. Again, he talks about the mythology of pre-dynastic Nile Valley society. The cooperative egalitarians were known as Shemsw Ma'at. The pre-dynastic society of the Nile Valley was agrarian, equal humans, members of an extended family. The myth of Shemsw Ma'at informs us that before European academies, before Arab madrasas, that there was a way of learning and working and living on this continent. It was there that the paths of Aset, Jehuti, and Asar and Nebuchadnezzar converged in the way of companions. So we get an idea that pre-dynastic times very peaceful, very egalitarian. However, one of the 2 texts to which Ayi Kwei Armah refers doesn't say this about Asar or about that time. it says that later, as they relate, Osiris came to Horus, and again I'm quoting directly, so this is a Greek, who's of course using Greek terms. Osiris came to Horus from the other world and exercised and trained him for the battle. After a time, Osiris asked Horus what he held to be the most noble of things. Horus replied to avenge one's father and mother for evil done to them. I'll continue down. It says, Horus served best for cutting off the flight of an enemy and annihilating him. When Osiris heard this, he was much pleased, since he felt that Horus now had an adequate preparation again for the battle. So if we're being told that he's egalitarian and peaceful, why therefore is he training his son for a battle against Seth? Now this is another text from Kemet where it talks about Asar as the eldest of the 9 gods, who set Ma'at throughout the 2 shores, placed the sun on his father's seat, lauded by Father Geb, beloved of his mother Nut, mighty when he fells the rebel, strong-armed when he slays his foe, who casts fear of him on his enemy, who vanquishes the evil plotters, whose heart is firm when he crushes the rebels. And this is who Ayi Kwei Armah says is not militaristic. If he's not militaristic, it will be very difficult to say who would be. Now, another issue with the text is these 6 words in total that are quoted are also taken out of context. So here we have an individual might not believe that the God was king, that the king was God on earth, but if he spoke about the king in public, it was in his interest to articulate the royal lie. Ma'at, the culture of truth, as one ancient text about confrontation of Seth and Horus complains, was made to sink into the underworld. That is to say, truth was driven firmly underground, and the public space was given over to stage emotions, lion utterances, and the bombast of aristocratic gesture and speech. So this is a decontextualized mention of Ma'at driven to the underworld, apparently because there's kingship and kings, and that is what we're complaining about, but that's not where the quote is actually coming from. So what is the confrontation between Seth and Horus about? Ayi Kwei Armah doesn't let us know, but I will let you know here. So the context of the quote is coming from Osiris crying out about, why is my son Horus being defrauded? Meaning that the Ennead, this is the panel of other divinities, Necheru, that they have not yet declared his son to be the rightful heir, and he's complaining about why is his heir to the throne being defrauded. And this is a text in Medu Neter, and then it says, a letter reached Osiris, and he says, very good is all you have done, and what the Ennead has found to do. Ma'at has been made to sink into the netherworld, as it says. Now you pay attention to this matter. The land in which I am is full of savage-looking messengers who fear no god or goddess. If I send them out, they will bring me the heart of every evildoer, and they will be here with me. So what's going on is Osiris is threatening the other divinities that if you don't make my son the rightful heir, then I will send out these savage-looking messengers, and they will bring me your hearts. So this is, again, at variance with what Ayi Kwei Armah is saying in the original text in Medu Neter. So the important note is that Ma'at is being is said to sink into the netherworld because his office of kingship is not given to his son Horus. But in the end, it is said that the Ennead, the other divinities, say he is right in all he says, the great and bounty, the Lord of sustenance. So eventually Isis brought Seth bound in fetters as a prisoner, and Atum said to him, why have you resisted being judged and have taken for yourself the office of Horus, that is the kingship? Seth said to him, not so, my good Lord. Let Horus, son of Isis, be summoned, and let him be given the office of his father Osiris. So again, it's very vastly different what goes on in the actual text from what we're getting in the book. So what is the office for which Heru and Seteth are contending? Kingship, and this is them, and this is the ruler they're contending over the throne. So all of the texts say that except for this new myth, which is Watnet Shemsw, this book by Ayi Kwei Armah. Now we'll go into the king, Asar as the king in Plutarch. So this is one of 2 texts that Ayi Kwei Armah even refers to, not quotes, not cites per se, but just refers to. So he says the narrative of Osiris, thanks in part to the paraphrases of Plutarch, is relatively well known. Then he also says, according to the myth, Aset and Nebuchadnezzar had a younger brother Seth. Now, he cites Plutarch, or mentions Plutarch, but it said that Pamelius heard a voice issuing from the shrine of Zeus, which bade him to proclaim in a loud voice that a mighty and beneficent king, Osiris, had been born. So we're taught that pre-dynastic times is about egalitarianism, yet we have a king, and that's Osiris, according to Plutarch, this very same source. And then in terms of seniority, it says, on the third day, Typhon Seth was born, but not in due season or manner, but with a blow he broke through his mother's side and leapt forth. On the fourth day, Isis was born in the regions that are ever moist, and on the fifth, Nephthys, as Nebuchadnezzar. So again, this is one, we have a problem of even Plutarch as a source. The entire history of black people, the one source that we're referring to is Plutarch, which is a Greek who's living in Roman times. That's the only one whose voice is allowed to speak. But even Plutarch, who is distorted because he's talking about Zeus. Now, we're from Zeus. It's very syncretistic, but even that is distorted further in the hands of Ayi Kwei Armah. Now, also there's this point about kingship and oversight. So it says, in Asar's absence, responsibility for oversight of the community shifted naturally to the sister Aset. So he never actually refers to Asar or Aset as king, queen, or anything of that sort. He just says they have oversight, but that's not what the texts themselves say. And then again, according to Plutarch, who he refers to, during his absence, the tradition is that Seth, Typhon Seth, attempted nothing revolutionary because Isis, who was in control, was vigilant and alert. But when he returned home, Typhon contrived a treacherous plot against him. So we'll come back to this point because he talks about when he goes to travel, he comes back and he takes his throne. And that refers to, he says, this was a pre-dynastic pattern of natural succession from male to female or from female to male according to who was born first, with no discriminatory gender assumption as to who was fit to exercise responsibility. And he continues, he says, succession in the Sethian scheme would have to be male to male, father to son, the homosexual principle at the root of monarchy, aristocracy, and monotheistic divinity. Now, what of Osar, or Osiris, in the two texts to which Armah refers, working to get his son to inherit kingship? So if you're saying that it's about male to female, female to male, the very one you're talking about as the paragon of this thing is actually saying my son must inherit the throne. And he also talks about a pre-dynastic pattern of male to female and female to male, but according to the Turin canon, the only female ruler is Ma'at herself. Aset is not one of the female rulers, according to the original text of Kemet, a primary source, the Turin canon. So if you're saying that Aset, because he delegated authority to her temporarily, qualifies as a ruler, again, that's not what the sources say. However, in so-called dynastic times, you have a total of 12 rulers, and for the sake of time, you can see Mernith, Nimad-Hat, Ankh-Sen Pepi, Nefertiti, Sobek Neferu Ra, Ahotep, Amos Nefertari, Hatshepsut, Nefer Aten, Telsret, Cleopatra I, Cleopatra VII. So we're being taught that the pre-dynastic pattern is male to female and female to male, but one single female ruler does not make a pattern. If there's anything, then the pattern would be during so-called dynastic times. Now we continue that according to every myth, story, hymn, and image from any period, Asar was a king. To miss this makes nonsense of what Heru and Seth are contending over, namely who would be heir to Asar's office, kingship, and throne. Asar was a king in this world and the afterlife, indeed considered the very embodiment of kingship. Before Heru inherited, and this is Heru his son, this attribute from him. As king in the afterlife, he presided over the weighing of hearts on the scale of Ma'at. So everything about Osiris is about pre-dynastic times, which is to say that there was kingship in pre-dynastic times. Ayi Kwei Armah claims otherwise, but where is his evidence? And we see this in text after text. Hail to you, Osiris, Lord of eternity, King of gods, which is what it says here. He presides in Jeddu. Text after text. He who set Ma'at throughout the two shores placed the son on the father's seat. Gives heir in the kingship of the two lands. Again, this is talking about Asar, what the Greeks call Osiris. It says, gives heir in the kingship of the two lands, seeing his worth, he gave it to him to lead the lands to good fortune. So again, the reason why we keep saying so-called pre-dynastic is because the people of Kemet consider this an unbroken dynasty, from Geb to Asar, from Asar to Heru, and then every other ruler is a reincarnation of Heru or Horus. Again, son of Isis, heir of Osiris, to give the office to its lord, the kingship to its rightful owner, Horus was found justified. His father's rank, that is of kingship, was given him. He came out crowned by Geb's command, received the rule of the two shores. This is that in Medunetra, and this is the translation. Again, it says the same thing, similar. His father's rank was assigned to him in the hall of Geb, claiming the office of his father Osiris, right, rules might. Now in the text, Ayi Kwei Armah says, Set and militarism have become the order of the day after Narmer, and we saw that quote earlier. But the text from Kemet say that Heru won over Set, and this represents a triumph of Ma'at over force. So it says in the translation, right rules might, but the word here is actually Ma'at, is over force. And again, not to belabor the point, but again, it talks about the office of Osiris. And Jehuti, who we're taught is part of that Shemsw, is saying, do we not know what is wrong? Shall one give the office of Osiris to Seth while his son Horus is there? So Jehuti, who's said to be one of these egalitarians, in the text from Kemet, he is the one who's advocating that his son should be the heir, but that's not what we get in Ayi Kwei Armah's text. Give the office of Osiris to his son Horus. And then they say, you are the good king of Egypt, you are the good lord of the lands forever and ever. Now we were taught before in the book, it says that Isis, or Aset, was the successor to Asar, but in the text from Kemet, Isis herself says, Horus has risen as ruler, life, prosperity, and health. The Ennead is in peace, heaven, and joy. They take garlands seeing Horus. Again, they see Horus given the office of his father. So Aset herself is not a contender to the throne, and she doesn't want it. She wants her son, Heru, to be the ruler, and she does various things in order to make him the ruler throughout this story between Horus and Seth. Now, we've looked a lot of text. We'll now turn our attention very briefly to the archaeological record, because we're taught that to know about so-called pre-dynastic times, let's look at the text, let's look at the myths, but there's also the archaeological record of what occurred before Narmer. And Gebel Sahaba, this is the oldest evidence of warfare known, that dates from roughly from 12,000 to 9,000 BCE. Roughly half of the 59 skeletons at the site had flint projectile points among the bones, probably indicating death in battle. Some had evidence of multiple healed wounds, perhaps indicating repeated fighting. So what you see here is in pre-dynastic times, so-called pre-dynastic times, this skull has been crushed by a mace, this skull has been crushed in by a mace, and all of these red marks are those who died from violence in this single cemetery. And again, if we're talking about pre-dynastic times as peaceful and egalitarian, then where from all of this? Where from all these projectiles that were found among the bodies of those who were killed? This is another one in so-called pre-dynastic times, 3500 BCE, the painted tomb. And in it, it shows the king with upraised mace, archetypal smiting posture, prepares to execute 3 kneeling captured prisoners. And this is him. And you see this later on in the Narmer palette that we will discuss. And here you also see fighting. And this is a fallen soldier, meaning that he has been killed by this one. So if we're taught that pre-dynastic times are peaceful and egalitarian, what about all of the evidence to the contrary in the archaeological record? It's not even mentioned. This is a knife handle that depicts 9 warriors in loincloths engaged in various stages of hand-to-hand combat. 2 soldiers armed with maces and flint knives grapple with one another. The lower 2 panels show a flotilla of river boats interspersed with corpses of slain enemies, and that's what we see here. So first it's a knife handle, and then 2 is depicting warfare. So how come this isn't explained to us in this new myth? The battlefield palette, and it shows enemy corpses, limbs akimbo, lie naked on the battlefield, being eaten by vultures and a lion. One of the corpses, whose eye is being eaten by a carrion bird, has his arms bound behind his back, indicating that at least some of the prisoners were executed or sacrificed after the battle. Why are we taught about this? And this is the Scorpion tableau. Again, we're talking about so-called pre-dynastic times. And it says the 5,250-year-old tableau of a victorious ruler. Inside with flint tools depict the procession of a ruler returning to the city of Abydos after vanquishing a rival leader at Nakada. The falcon is drawn above the scorpion. The falcon is a standard symbol for the god Horus, and the name Horus is another word for a king in Egyptian history. And again, this is what we see here. This is before Narmer. So how come we're not talking about this? Gebel Sheikh Suleiman, by his death, surrounded by slaughtered and captured enemies, and that's what we see here. This is the capture behind the back. By his death around 3050, Ka had conquered his major military rival at Hyrcanopolis and unified all of Egypt south of the Delta into a single kingdom. The completion of his conquest of unification was to fall to his son, Narmer, who founded the first dynasty of Egypt, or Kemet. And then, however, in the text by Ayi Kwei Armah, this is the fall guy for everything. He brought in militaristic things. But what we see is Narmer carrying on a tradition just as we saw in the painted tomb and not starting something new or some kumbaya, let's all sing and hold hands. It's not an accurate view of what was going on at that time. So here we see ritually smiting a prisoner with a mace marching in triumph among the corpses of his enemies with whose decapitated heads are placed between their legs, and capturing rival cities symbolized by a bull smashing through city walls, a memorial of his military unification of Egypt. Now, Ayi Kwei Armah didn't always see Narmer as the fall guy, and as a matter of fact, I've read each and every one of his books in the Resolutionaries. He says that my reading tells me that the unification of Kemet was a peaceful process lasting centuries, not a sudden violent spasm. Violence was important at a decisive moment when violent opposition to unity was put down by the superior military force of Narmer. But Narmer, without a group behind him working year after year toward unity, could not have achieved the unification of the vast territories of the Nile Valley. My interest is in that work. So in this text, the peaceful egalitarians are behind Narmer in their crushing violent opposition to unity, but within a few years, it's changed to Narmer is the fall guy. So in conclusion, what we find is Ayi Kwei Armah creating his own myth without telling us that he is doing so. There's a thin line, however, between myth creation, using old names but with stories that directly contradict what primary, secondary, and tertiary sources say, and intellectual fraud. This is being touted as expository prose. However, I think it's a new genre of ahistorical fiction, not to be confused with historical fiction, disguised as history and or disguised as an accurate representation of actual past myths. It actually relies on blind followers, and that's what the word Shemsw actually translates to in every single dictionary of Middle Nature. He says it's companions, but all the dictionaries say that it means just followers. And following distortion from an unquestioned guru rather than on evidence, facts, quotes, accuracy, or truth. In my opinion, Ma'at as truth should not be sacrificed on the altar of a counterfeit Ma'at, the statue of Egalite, as Eurasian rhetorical ethic of egalitarianism. What we find is this idea of egalitarianism. You find it in the French Revolution where they say liberté, égalité, fraternité. You find it in the US Constitution where they say all men are created equal. But what all of those have in common is that the people who said all men are created equal had enslaved people in their backyards. The ones who said liberté, égalité, and fraternité, within just a few years were going to re-enslave Haiti. So the rhetorical ethic is saying all these beautiful things while actually doing something else. And we have no need for a similar African rhetorical ethic saying one thing while doing another, where egalitarianism rhetoric is propped up by falsehood. If the only way to advance so-called altruistic egalitarianism is through the very type of falsehood that one decries, one must question the altruism of it all. And finally, Ayi Kwei Armah should let us know what the myths say in the words of our African ancestors without the distortion or omission. Otherwise, Ma'at, the culture of truth, will be made to sink into the underworld. And there are just a few quotes from Smee and Saheti Pen, which Ayi Kwei Armah and his group translated. There's a quote that says, "Tell no falsehood, you are a great one." In Chi, we say, "Wude na brava tu paya, wudu na mumwunsa wa chipyo." If you travel with fraud, you may reach your destination, but you will be unable to retrace your steps. Otroko de enfia pim tu paya, Whereas a liar takes 1,000 years to go on a journey, the one who speaks the truth follows and overtakes in a day, and others that go along with that same idea. But finally, every man teaches by his deeds, according to Nana Patahotep. Sometimes those deeds are to tell us what we should emulate, and other times those deeds are telling us what we should not emulate. So in conclusion, Dua, Eshe Pupo, Madam Wase, Jeff, Asante Nisana, Matondu Mamenge, and thank you.
Thank you all for this particularly enlightening discourse. As rightly stated, I mean, Armah stands out in terms of his discourse, his analysis concerning Africa and its future. And I think clearly, I'm struggling to understand why he would attempt not to make a claim that is firmly rooted in the literature, the ancient literature for that matter. Because obviously, those who are interested at a certain level of, advanced technical know-how will go to the literature and take a look. So, I'm trying to understand the purpose of the risk he took if we take as true the critiques that have been put forward. Because he put this matter in the public domain. And anyone with any interest in these questions beyond the superficial would definitely want to trace the sources. And find out the points of, connection between the claims that are then made arising from what the sources more or less provide. So, it's jarring to my mind, why this would occur at all if we take the critiques here, as relevant and if you like, true, right?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for both papers. Mine is a simple question. Will you be sending your critiques to Ayi Kwei Armah? And how will you be publicizing your reviews of his work online and in tandem with any publicity for the book as it's released and published and so forth?
Sent to him because I was actually part of his Shemsw from July of 2017 up until March of this year. And saying that, well, first, one of the discourses, so we were sending papers back and forth in the Shemsw, we were all discussing these things. And anytime I would send a paper now, I'm not even critiquing egalitarianism, I'm not saying it's bad or anything. What I'm saying is that the source, I know all of these sources that he's referring to, I'm saying the source says something different from what you're saying. In response to any time I would bring up that the source says something different, he would say, "You're calling me a liar." And then he would also say, "You just like hierarchy." And in the context of the Shemsw, it helped me to see some of the weaknesses of what a Shemsw can become, which is the one who organizes the Shemsw can become a guru and can have blind followers. it reminded me, if those in the audience are familiar with George Orwell's Animal Farm, where all the animals are declared equal, but then the pigs start to say that, well, some animals are more equal than others. And this is exactly what can happen in a Shemsw context, where you can have a Napoleon, and then you can have another one who is the propagandist, who then supports anything that the one who is saying and articulating and saying all these beautiful things, brings forth. In one of the submissions that I sent to the Shemsw, I put forth my guesses in terms of why he was doing this, because I said that it is difficult to understand. What is difficult to understand is the general omission of sources cited on Asar in a book in which he features prominently as mythic protagonist. The reader is left to guess possible reasons why those sources are not cited, such as 1, the author only knows sources, whichever those may be, because we're not privy to that are in line with his interpretation and does not know those that contradict it. 2, and this is again my guess, I said, the author knows the sources but has found reason to disqualify each and every single source that goes against his interpretation. 3, the author knows the sources but finds all sources that contradict his interpretation to be irrelevant. Related to number 3, the author has made a decision for whatever reason that Plato from pages 48, 50, and then 104 to 5, and Hitler from 55 to 56 are the only sources he will cite at length in a book, and others can just be referred to, including those of the culture whose concepts, Asar, Aset, Ma'at, etc. he is using. And then 5, my guess was, the author knows the sources that contradict his interpretation, but has made a conscientious decision not to cite any source on Asar that goes against his view on so-called pre-dynastic as egalitarianism equals good, and so-called dynastic as hierarchical, which equals bad. In short, I said that what we have is a rehash of Christianity, Manichaean dualism, where one thing is good all the time and its opposite is bad all the time, and it's just a more extended treatise on that same basic principle. And there were quite a few things that went on, and so this is part 1, and I've only given us a short snippet of the things that are factually incorrect. There are quite a few more throughout the book that are factually incorrect, and I just put the sources, and that's what I did throughout the whole thing. I just gave them the source, this source, this source, this says the opposite. But I agree with Shemsw that it's very dangerous, because what it can become is a Jamestown, where on the word of the guru, everybody drinks the Kool-Aid. And those who do not drink the Kool-Aid are summarily kicked out of the Shemsw, including myself, including another member of the audience who's here. I don't know if he wants to be known. And another person who had the audacity to question him. They didn't even come with any of the sources that contradict. They just started to question him as well. And the next thing we knew, we're kicked out of this Shemsw. So I found in the exact same month that I started the Shemsw, I was also installed as a traditional ruler at Ekwapim Mampong. And I found that to be much more egalitarian than the Shemsw, because the madman of the community can say whatever he wants. There are people who are disabled who are right there and they can say whatever they want. Women, everybody has a voice. And I've seen the ruler of Mampong, the Mampong Hini, have his opinion be put to the side and we choose something else collectively. You understand? Whereas in the Shemsw, in its makeup, in and of itself, is very elitist. There are only people of very, very, very high standing in society who are allowed to be part of the Shemsw. And if they don't contribute within X amount of months, they're kicked out summarily. And I think we'll go back to the audience for another round.
Okay, this is a broader question. How would, and this is to Dr. Chiwenji, how would you place this particular infringement against the broader corpus of his work? You know, does it completely, I don't know the word, does it undermine the stance that he's known to have held and holds on these questions? You know, completely, or to put it another way, how do we, you know, understand him and make sense of his work set against this particular, you know, problem, if you like. This is latest work, right? You know, and if your critiques are true, you know, how do we, you know, place Armah within the grand scheme of things, as an intellectual, as an activist, and all of that? I'm interested to know your views.
Atrokrose no kwapim, it translates to one falsehood destroys 1,000 truths. And I was looking at a lecture by the late Nama Amos Wilson, where he brought up the issue of character, where he says, you know, character is more important than ideology because many types of character can hide behind ideology. And from my experience in the Shemsw, is that through devotion to this new divinity called egalitarianism, it then allowed him to say, okay, well, you dislike hierarchy. And then once he identifies the person who dislikes hierarchy, then that leaves him free to do whatever he wanted to and say whatever he wanted to say, where he started off saying, oh, well, that just means that you're calling me a liar. So actually, in going through the entire Google Hangout, I told everyone, here is the entire transcript going back from April 2017 up to now. Do a search for the word liar. The very first time it was used was when I was absent from the group. He says, do y'all remember when Obadale called me a liar? And he actually had people in the Shemsw, and that was where the first occurrence of the word, the second occurrence was also him. And it was amazing just in terms of the herd mentality, because people started saying, yes, I remember. Now, the reason why I knew that I didn't say that is because I was teaching a course on Foundations of African Thought, where we were going into the difference between morality of being versus morality of action. So what I was saying, and what I still say, is that he's definitely lying, but to make the pronouncement that he therefore is a liar, that wasn't something that I would do very conscientiously. And I also thought that the members of the Shemsw would see very clearly that what's going on is that if you can put people off on a diversion and say, look, he's making ad hominem attacks, that now we can't deal with if you say he said that I'm lying, now we have to go and interrogate, well, are you lying or are you not lying? But if you can intentionally manipulate the words and say, he's calling me a liar, now we never even get to are the words true or not. Now it becomes, this person is a problem, this person is blah, blah, blah. And I was like, these are intelligent people, they're going to see. So I didn't even bring forth a counter narrative, and this is the danger of a single narrative, because I was like, the people will see that he's just trying to get away from dealing with the fact that all of these sources say the opposite of what he's saying, but that never happened. And finally, I sent a document, because we said, let's come up with some ground rules. And I sent a document saying that the major rule has to be that falsehood is not allowed. So if it is shown that this person who's a member of the Shemsw has lied about someone else, then there has to be some type of repercussion, and that was the very last meeting. So in a group that proposes to be about Ma'at, the idea of being truthful and not telling falsehoods about other people, much less about what our ancestors said, that was not allowed. Ma'at as a definition, instead of dealing with truth, justice, righteousness, harmony, balance, order, reciprocity, we have a new Ma'at of egalitarianism. Now, he was much a stickler about using the dictionary when it came to let's define succession. I said, okay, well, let's use the dictionary to define Ma'at. Every single dictionary, you won't find egalitarianism. And the main point is he translated Shemsw and Sahetipen, he and the Shemsw. And he has the word Ma'at, of course, the word Ma'at occurs several times. Not one single time could it be translated as egalitarianism. I hope you understand. And the idea is that when you tell a falsehood, you forget that you told a falsehood, because if you think it means egalitarianism, at least one time in your own text that you yourself are translating, you should translate Ma'at as egalitarianism. But you tell, there's no way you could translate it as that. Oh, tell me the egalitarianism. It doesn't make any sense. It has to be true. You understand? And I'd like to also point out that he was invited several times to, discuss this, debate this. He said he's willing to debate at any point in time. But of course, as we've come to the conference, we see that he is not here. And I'll rest on that. The proverb, if you sow falsehood, you reap deceit, and there is no fraud in truth. Ma'at.
I'm going to be as brief as I can and not hold brief for people who aren't here. I think it's not correct procedurally to use a single narrative to go into the issues of a group for an audience that is not aware of the ins and outs of that group. I think what is important here is the discussion of what Ayi Kwei Armah was saying in the introduction of that book. I'm not sure if it was made clear to the audience that the basic text that was used for these two presentations is an introduction of, I don't know how many pages, 10 pages or something. It's not a book in itself, right?
Mine is for what net Shemsw, the entire book. Is this for the introduction to Shemsw?
Sorry.
I said mine is for what net Shemsw, which is an entire book. My paper is based on what net Shemsw, which is an entire book, and Shemsw is on a different book, Shemsw and Sahetipen, the introduction of Shemsw and Sahetipen. So we're working on two different books.
But the thesis presented in the book and somebody who the same thesis in the introduction that commented on that two different presentations of the same doctrine. So even though one is book-length version, and the other is a short essay version, there are two discussions of the same topic.
Okay, my mistake.
Could I ask, does his presentation of cooperative egalitarianism necessarily lead to the ridiculousness of the crawling baby example or 100 cooks? Is there no other discussion of a cooperative egalitarianism that can be made which doesn't end up in that ridiculousness? And there was an aspect of the discussion regarding Ma'at and Asset, which was about the pre-dynastic sources and what Kambon would say the dynastic sources, and the presentation of the meaning of Ma'at and what it meant in terms of hierarchical dynastic rule, and what I think we are calling here cooperative egalitarianism. And I think the part that Kambon maybe could talk a bit more about was the presentation Armah made in terms of the ideology of hierarchy and kingship, which resulted in a certain presentation of Ma'at. And the argument Armah was making was that prior to this, there was a different conception of Ma'at, which was not authoritarian, hierarchical, and so on. And I think that a point that has to come out, so what I'm asking Chinwezu is that, is there any way to be egalitarian without, is there any way to be egalitarian and have a working hierarchy of function, of ability and function? Can you be hierarchical in ability and function and also egalitarian? Are they exclusive? Are they mutually exclusive? Hear a bit more about this, because it means that the most important person in the hierarchy is correct, knows the right things, tells people what to do, and that is the way you have to go. Is that a reasonable implication?
Well, let's put it this way. The hierarchy tells us that there's a ladder of positions with one above the other, down the sequence, whether it's a power hierarchy or whatever kind of hierarchy, positional hierarchy. It doesn't tell us necessarily whether it's a hierarchy in terms of opinion or of command. In the hierarchy of command, what the top man says goes, everybody does it, or faces the consequences. Like among apes, among baboons, the top baboon lays down the law, and everybody has to obey it, or he beats them up.
So there's a distinction between the king, let's say, kingship, and different types of command. You went to the baboon and how to organize a hunt, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not simply a principle of I think, let me try and get back to where all this came from. The organization of our societies for survival, and what Ayi Kwei Armah is apparently saying with this cooperative egalitarianism. Now, in your understanding, he's saying that there should be no hierarchy. Is that right?
That is what cooperative egalitarianism is prescribing as an innovative way for us in thinking about our future. Yes, there should be no hierarchy.
Yeah, so the debate must continue after. Just very quickly, we have to ask the question, if you're saying that in pre-dynastic times this existed and that didn't exist, we have to ask the question, who told you, where do you know that from? Otherwise, we cannot take someone's imagination to be a source. And then also, you can look at what the person says versus looking at their hands, that is to say what they do. So a person can espouse egalitarianism while within his own Shemsw group does not allow for any dissent, and will kick out myself and another member of the audience if they even dare to question his authority. I think some of us can definitely relate to that. But we'll go to the next discussion, which is Dion Sumani's panel, and we'll close with that. That's on neo-Garveyism, education and industrialization in Africa. Okay. All right, so Dion.